It's nice that I can't see the crowd, because it's kind of intimidating after having so many people speak of their immaculate journeys, and I hardly have anything to tell you people. But I do have small milestones that I've crossed, and maybe you could relate to mine. So before I begin with whatever I have to say, I'd like to ask a couple of questions, just a couple. How many of you here are engineers? A call of hands, please. All right, big number. How many of you took up engineering by choice, or you liked engineering? The number has considerably dropped, and I happen to be in that very majority. So let's go back to my 12th grade. This is my journey. In my 12th grade, the CBSE board decided to give an entire row of students 0 on our final exams, and we had to fight for our marks. And in this process, I lost an entire year of education, and I plunged into deep depression. Adding to this, it was a little difficult to explain to my parents that I wouldn't consciously sabotage my exams, because I might not have been an overachieving student, not an 80–90% student, but I definitely wasn't someone to fail. So this was a little hard. It was an obvious blow for me. So after 12th, after all this happened, my parents decided not to take any more risks with my education, and so put me into engineering. It's a safe option, right? So they put me into engineering. Now, if I were to categorize engineering students into divisions, I'd do so like this. The first category of engineers are the ones that are genuinely interested in studying engineering. These are the ones that get to the root of the subjects, understand on a more conceptual level, and these are probably also the ones that go on to become huge entrepreneurs or inventors and maybe just excel in their own fields. Then you have your second category of students. These are the ones that have no idea what they're doing. Might have scored well in maths and science and just ended up with engineering, or maybe just followed their friends into it, right? Now your third category and your final category are the ones that have had interests elsewhere, but due to various family and or circumstantial reasons, could not pursue it and landed up in engineering. So as you all can assume, I belong to the third category, and also hailing from an extremely quintessential, typical South Indian family, engineering was my only go. So before my first day of college, my family, or mostly my uncle, actually sat me down and explained to me that the computer science, so I'm a computer science engineer. Computer science stream is an ever-growing field, and that you have to constantly keep updating yourself, constantly learn new things in order to stay on par with the current job opportunities. And that the JNTU, or rather any university, the set curriculum is efficient, but it's definitely not sufficient for you to get a high-paying job. So, all right, the advice was good. So I got into engineering. My first year, I had huge transitional issues. I come from a CBSE background of schooling. I did not do the normal, after 10th, the intermediate, the state board, but I continued to do my central board for my 11th and 12th as well. And so engineering was a huge jump to me. The transition was difficult, primarily because CBSE allows students to try new things. There's a completely different mannerism of teaching and learning. They believe in conceptual teaching and learning. So this was entirely new to me, and here I did not see anyone being curious enough, because I strongly believe that curiosity leads to research, and research leads to knowledge. But I didn't see the curiosity front itself. So this was a little hard for me. As I got the hang of things in my first year, I started to learn things on the side. Because by this time, I also figured that the curriculum or the college is not going to provide anybody with a map of all the branches in engineering, because there are various branches in engineering. You could go on and on and on. Branches of engineering and what jobs they would fetch. So I had to do my own research. So I figured this and I started to learn things on the side. Now the internet is an amazing place if you know how to use it. So there's this website called Coursera that offers courses from huge universities across the globe and on a vast number of topics. You have NPTEL lectures online, and also you have YouTube tutorials available from any person. So I felt like a kid in a candy store. It was honestly like walking into a huge library, because there was a lot to learn. There were truckloads to learn. So I did this in my first year. And when I was doing this, there was something I realized, that if engineers had anything in abundance, it was time. It's just that they don't know how to utilize it. So when I realized that, I started to utilize my time, optimize my time by attending events and taking part in things here and there. So once I started to do this, year 2 and year 3 were a complete blur to me, because I do not remember everything I did. I was doing things left, right, and center. My friends were starting to get a little annoyed because I was hardly around. They would call me a mountain goat because I sprung from one thing to another. They would call me spring feet. The funniest nickname I got was boing, because apparently that's the sound a spring makes. I would boing from one thing to another. Also, my faculty was starting to get annoyed too. I hardly attended classes anymore. My attendance was below minimum. Probably also paid the condonation forms once or twice. And adding to which, of course, you have the parental pressure. My family wasn't happy about it either. But being the rebellious 20, 21-year-old that I was, continued to do things here and there. And then cut to my final year. A month into my final year, I had this amazing opportunity at a startup that dealt with placement training. Now, I hadn't attended a single placement by then, nor had I ever attended a single placement class. But nevertheless, I joined because that wasn't my forte of job back then. Initially, my job was solely to help my seniors code a test engine. But then, due to a lack of manpower, I was pushed into training. Now, training wasn't definitely one of my first options when I considered work post-graduation, because I was studying to work as a software engineer. So it was never one of my options. But then that got me thinking, why is it that despite the lack of well-paying jobs, engineers continue to stay in this field? Why is it that they do not try to do different things related or non-related to engineering? And that's when the answers hit me. There was a bulb on my head. So I realized that there were certain risk factors that every student considers before experimenting with their careers. Careers are important, of course. You wouldn't want to experiment with them. Of course, there are your risk factors. So primarily, your first risk factor is your relatability factor. Whether or not the experiment that I am doing right now is going to add to my resume. Because let's face it, be it a law student or an art student or your basic engineer, you will do anything and everything to help make your resume better. So that is your relatability factor, whether or not it will help my resume. Your second thing is, will your degree still be a backup for you? So say, assuming I've worked as an animation artist for a year or two, and then I decided, okay, it's not working out. Let's go back and apply for a software job at some MNC. Will I still be able to secure that job? Has my 2 years of animation experimenting led me to a dead end? These are certain things, and most importantly, am I willing to invest that time and capital in my crucial years of education? These are your risk factors a student considers before getting to experiment during their 4 years of engineering course. But then I put these doubts aside. I took that leap because I was still in my final year. My stakes were lower. I did not have much to lose, right? Even if I failed, I was still 22. I could still bounce back up, no issues. So I took that leap. But initially, I had huge troubles because if you can see me right now, it's because of that spotlight. Because otherwise, you won't be able to see me. I am hardly 5 feet off the ground, and I'm still pretty sure that the backbenchers can't see me if I'm not wearing heels. And it so happened on certain occasions that I would walk into class and the students would continue to do with whatever they were doing because they simply refused to believe that I was qualified enough to teach them or old enough to teach them. They would sometimes actually ask me, not the students, but the teachers who'd come in to ask for high tea, coffee. I've had instances where they would ask me, "Madam, will you have milk?" Yes, that's happened. So these were my physical issues that I had. But then as my experience grew, I sort of realized that the minute the listener starts to relate to the speaker, they listen to you better. Another thing I realized, I wish I was smart enough to realize it before, but another thing I realized that the minute you start to tell them stories, they listen to you better. Because the human mind is a story processor and not a logic processor. And that's when I started to use my year 2 and 3 experiences to tell them stories to relate to me. So I'll give you a couple of instances. My first example would be my MUN experience. Model United Nations have played a major role in my life and in my network. But I wasn't an instant success. My first MUN, I clearly remember, it was 5 years ago. I was the delegate of Armenia at a UN development program in some college, and I barely spoke. I don't remember speaking at all. Or rather, I think I spoke once, and I managed to embarrass myself. I'm sure nobody laughed, but that was out of courtesy. Nobody laughed. But I'm pretty sure I embarrassed myself. But then that didn't stop me from trying. I went on to further conferences because I knew the knowledge gained through those conferences was immense, and it couldn't match up to anything else. So I continued to do that. And I remember the struggle I went through. Believe it or not, I've not always been an amazing public speaker. So the struggle I went through to conjure up enough courage to speak one proper sentence was the struggle I told my students to face their interviews. And that helped them. Because of course I was telling them stories and they could relate to the speaker. So this helped. Another instance was my experience with journalism. My journalism was a lot, so not a lot of engineering students get into journalism in the first place because of course you have parents and of course language barriers. But it was fun for me. It was a lot of fun for me. Initially, I would do the regular reporting jobs. The most fun part was taking interviews of theater artists and rock band artists. It was probably the best part of my job because those cool dudes with long hair and black t-shirts look extremely hot. So fangirling and crushing on them, I'd go and take interviews and stuff and take pictures with them. That was probably the best part of my job. And then I jumped to sports journalism. Now this is something I've wanted to do for a very long time. But then of course, mom, no. So I didn't get to do it, and this was my dream come true. This was in my second year. Here, so to give you a basic idea, football to me is what cricket to most of the nation is. So I would eat, drink, sleep, wake up to football every day, day in, day out. So writing about it, reporting the English Premier League and the Bundesliga and the Champions League was a lot of fun. But then, of course, you have your parents and so on and so forth, but that's another story. So when I was doing this, I learned to write properly. We could write. Coming from a CBSE background, my English was good enough, but I couldn't write as well. So my writing got much better. And this helped me teach my students how to write essays for their placements. And yes, essays. Because you'd be surprised at the standard of essays that engineering students write. You can't blame them. because most of them come from a rural background and they do need that additional guidance to write proper essays. But it's still a little below standards. So it helped me with all of this. So things were going okay, but then I hit a point where I started to wonder whether I hit a deadline. I did not see any growth opportunities with placement training because I was already at the top of my tree. I was a placement trainer and that's it. You can't go higher than that. Or at least that's what I thought back then. I was so upset. All my risk factors that I had considered earlier, I probably should have considered them better because right now they're knocking on my door and I have no courage to answer them. So at this point, I rather considered to quit my job and write for my higher studies because there is also this parental pressure constantly asking you as to what you're doing with life and where you're getting at. So when that happened, I considered quitting and writing for my higher education. But then on that very same day, luckily enough, an MNC approached and asked me to join their corporate training team. Now this was a huge deal because I knew that day my risk had paid off. All my risks had paid off. And another thing that happened on the very day was that a student of mine from Chennai called me to thank me for training them on behalf of their entire class. They actually made a WhatsApp group chat and sent me a video saying, "Thank you so much, ma'am." And that's when I knew, that day, that moment, I knew what job satisfaction meant. It is a lot to have when someone thanks you for whatever you're doing. It's nice to know that you have affected somebody's life. And that's when I knew what job satisfaction meant, and I continued to train. And I also went on to get certified as a trained trainer from the Dale Carnegie Mumbai chapter. And that was one experience. And in my 19 months of experience as a placement trainer, I've observed one thing. It's that students, specifically engineering students, are shy. Yes, this may be surprising, but they are definitely shy. Because if you've observed, engineering students have never gone to the bathroom alone. They always go in flocks. And till date, I don't understand why. I've never understood as a student, I still don't get it as a teacher. So if they can't go to the bathroom alone, you can only imagine the kind of daunting feeling they have in their head if they are wanting to try something different. And if they don't have company, things become much worse, right? But then, this is something I want to tell, that there is no set time to learn. To start off with, before I go there, I want to tell you one thing, that engineering students, when you compare it to any other students that age, have low exposure, and this is again my observation, have low exposure to the world when compared to any other students elsewhere. And this kind of holds them in a bubble. So they have this comfort zone, like this carpet of mine, that they can't go, now I can't go out of this, but they don't want to go out of that. So this sort of holds them back to try something new. But one thing they do need to understand is that they need to try things new, and that there's no set time to learn. Because at 23, I sit among 9 and 10-year-olds learning basics of guitar chords. Now, I may look like 9 and 10-year-olds, but I'm definitely not that age. So it is a little embarrassing to learn among children, but then you eventually get over that embarrassment for the greater gain. And that is what is important. Let me give you a better idea of why learning at any given point of time is important. So assume you have an examination or something that you have to prepare for beforehand, and you procrastinate, which is pretty obvious. You give the last couple of hours maybe to prepare for your exam, assuming it's your exam. You give the last couple of hours for your exam, and then that's when something happens. That exact moment, something happens. Maybe your relative might walk in, or maybe your sister meets with an accident and you have to rush her to the hospital, or simply an amazing movie may be on the television. Because I don't know if it's happened to you, but it's happened to me on a lot of occasions, maybe 95% of the times, is that every time I've had an exam the next day, the television planned to air one of the 3 Lord of the Rings movies on one channel, or some Balakrishna movie somewhere. Now, I'm a huge fan of both Lord of the Rings and Balakrishna, so I do want, even though I have all the movies in high definition on my laptop, I still decide to watch that movie on television without studying. And this is what most of them do. But this is not one incident, is it? This is life for you in a nutshell. Life doesn't give you time to prepare for anything. You think, "Arey haan, I'll prepare towards the end," but then that's exactly when something happens. Maybe Shah Rukh Khan might cross the road and that's it. You don't study anymore. So, my observation from life in a nutshell is that the minute you start investing in your free time, trying to learn things new, you start getting prepared to whatever curveball life has to throw at you at some point of time. And life starts becoming easier also, because you're ready for things. You're ready for your job interview, you're ready for things here and there. Because I honestly believe, out of observation again, is that the minute you start building on your life skills, your resume starts to build itself. You don't even need to try. So that's the sincere advice I have, and the giveaway from my talk, is that the minute you start building on your life skills, your resume starts to build itself. Thank you so much.